Limbus Company is a dark narrative-driven game developed by Project Moon as the third installment in Project Moon's narrative trifecta, followed by Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina. Limbus Company is set in a dystopian world known as the City. This game is a turn-based strategy game. You play as the executive manager of Limbus Company, managing a group of employees named Sinners, whom all have their own tragic backstory. The goal of the game is to collect golden bows created in the storyline of Lobotomy Corporation, diving into each sinner's past in the process. This video will analyze Limbus Company through the lens of violence and psychology. The first lens is violence. Video games cause violence is a common association for games. However, we'll be discussing how Limbus Company, which is an inherently violent and dark-themed game, does the opposite. In Limbus Company, violence is stylized, excessive, and often grotesque. First, let's go into how players play the game. The player plays the game using simple inputs by either dragging a line across the screen to select skills or targeting skills individually to specify which enemy you want your sinners to attack. Although the second one is mostly for specific battles, we'll be focusing on the first one instead. The simplicity of the inputs and animation between the sinners using their abilities create a gap between the player and their specific consequences. This separation highlights what could be seen as performativity without direct responsibility, allowing players to distinguish real life and fiction, and separates the players from violence caused by in-game avatars. Although the players make decisions, it is the sinners who commit the violent actions, often with screaming, transformation, or attacking enemies in grotesque animation. The gap between animation and consequences introduces emotional detachment, turning violence into a sight to be seen instead of the player's action, while still having the engaging aspects. Now let's talk about the animations itself. As we know, players interact with the gameplay by selecting skills, targeting enemies, but they can also activate sinner-specific abilities called ego, which exchanges a sinner's mental fortitude to gain more power for a specific attack. However, rather than using this to glorify external destruction, they reflect on internal damage instead. For each ego, they often represent a sinner's unresolved trauma, conflict, or desire, where egos are not only a form of attack, but a metaphor for internal suffering, especially in their distorted form, where most egos completely remove the humanoid part of the sinner, becoming something more monstrous. Although players enjoy violence in video games through carnivorous death, and using ego effectively in battle is rewarding, but it feels unnerving, excessive, and emotionally heavy rather than encouraging detachment to violence. It invites reflection. Our second lens is psychology, where Limbus Company creates player psychological impact by exploring character backstory and their specific battle mechanics for the Kanto, and exploring morally gray areas with real life moral values. Limbus Company engages with the player emotionally through our sinners. Each one's backstory is unique and haunting, such as Yi Sang's failed ideals, Heathcliff's regret, Sinclair's abuse. Players learn more about each sinner as they progress, going as far as revisiting old memories, hearing about their inner thoughts, and understanding pain through dialogue and manifestations of their egos. These aren't traditional power-ups, as they dive into each sinner's inner turmoil and trauma. Players who emphasizes with morally complex, violent characters are less likely to experience increased aggression. This type of interactivity creates an unique form of empathy and reflection, and sadness, making the violence in game feel heavy rather than fun or glorified. The game makes psychological tension by exploring morally gray zones and cognitive dissonance, as the players, who is the manager of the sinners in the story, commands the sinners to fight and suffer for an unknown goal other than to collect golden bows. The game never explicitly tells you what you are doing is correct, often leaving the manager and by extension the player to make decisions that feel morally questionable, forcing sinners to activate ego abilities which clearly hurts the character mentally or physically. This contradiction between winning and feeling like you are harming the sinners create discomfort that lingers ever so slightly in the back of your head, even after you win the battle, creating lasting cognitive and emotional discomfort, where the lack of a clear moral solution forces the player to confront the consequences of of their choices without the comfort of of justification or redemption. Therefore, although Limbus Company is a dark and gruesome game with excessive violence, it does not promote violence. Instead, it offers reflection on human suffering and offer insight into responsibility and control.